Every civilization rises, grows, breaks down, and eventually fades. That's the life cycle historian Arnold Toynbee laid out back in 1934, just as the British Empire was coming to grips with its shrinking global power. The idea stuck, not just with the West, but with leaders across the world. Even Russia's President Putin echoed it in late 2023, saying, "Someone develops, then fades away. New leaders appear." So the question today is it America's turn to fade? Can the US hold on to its global dominance? Or is it already slipping into decline, just another empire on the timeline of history? That answer depends not only on how Washington responds to pressure, but also on how strong the alternatives become. And the clearest, most organized alternative yet? BRICS. In this video, we're diving into the rise of BRICS, how it's grown from a loose alliance into a serious global force, and whether it has the power to challenge US supremacy. Is a new world order forming right before our eyes? And if so, who's going to be at the helm? BRICS is advocating for a more equitable, balanced, and representative global system, one that reflects today's socio-political, multipolar reality. How should USA respond?
Many countries have. They've ripped us off left and right.
When even friendly nations are turning to BRICS for trade, investment, and diplomacy.
But now it's our turn to do the ripping.
And if the developing world sees BRICS as a vehicle for fairness, so why does BRICS matter? And why should Washington be paying close attention? To dissect this, the US dollar, the world's dominant reserve currency, underpins nearly 60% of central bank reserves and about 90% of global trade transactions. This gives the United States an unparalleled edge, one it's used to shape global politics through sanctions, debt leverage, control over dollar printing, to gold reserves, and financial incentives. What started as a loose acronym has evolved into a powerful intergovernmental force. BRICS, named after Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, came together formally in 2010, with roots tracing back to a 2009 summit in Russia. Born in the shadow of the global financial crisis, the group's original mission was to push for more influence in the IMF and World Bank, instead creating institutions parallel to them, such as the New Development Bank and Contingent Reserve Arrangement. But by 2024, BRICS had expanded its ambitions and its membership, now joined by Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. The bloc represents a vast chunk of the world's population, energy supply, and economic potential. Argentina was initially invited too, but opted out after a political shift under President Javier Milei. Now, having monopoly over currency enables USA to regulate and interfere in global transactional checkpoints and assert its dominance. If only countries could somehow de-dollarize trade through deregularized digital currencies or adopting a parallel network of financial trade. BRICS came up with the answers, trading in their currencies, reducing dependence on the petrodollar. Russia has already moved from dollars to euros, then to rubles and gold in response to sanctions. China is taking it further, issuing renminbi loans, promoting panda bonds, and slashing its US debt holdings. Even more telling is the infrastructure being built to support this shift. Russia's SPFS and China's CIPS now operate as alternatives to SWIFT, enabling international transactions beyond Washington's reach. And today, 95% of trade between Moscow and Beijing bypasses the dollar entirely. But what happens to American global power if the dollar is no longer the world's backbone? Can the US maintain its influence when rising powers create their own rules, currencies, and institutions? With the New Development Bank, the $100 billion contingent reserve arrangement, with nearly half the world's population and over a third of its purchasing power under its umbrella, and a growing list of joint working groups on energy, health, and tech, BRICS is building more than just an alliance. It's constructing a parallel world order. One of the most pressing questions for Washington today is, what happens when the world's most vulnerable economies begin to see BRICS, not the West, as their lifeline? It's easy to dismiss BRICS as fragmented or ideologically inconsistent, but doing so underestimates the depth of disillusionment many countries feel toward US-led institutions. During the 2008 financial crash, and again in the COVID-19 crisis, the IMF pumped liquidity into the global economy, but developing nations got the short end of the stick. Special drawing rights, SDRs, were unequally distributed, and loan conditions often often required painful policy reforms. The result? Countries started turning elsewhere, especially to China. Beijing now offers bilateral currency swaps to financially strained economies, effectively injecting renminbi liquidity without the strings attached. In 2023, Argentina used over $2.8 billion worth of Chinese yuan to repay IMF debts. Around the same time, Saudi Arabia and China struck a similar currency deal. These swaps don't just stabilize struggling economies, they internationalize China's currency and quietly erode the dollar's monopoly. BRICS also exploits colonial-era resentment and the West's perceived hypocrisy. From South Africa to Niger, anti-colonial rhetoric resonates. China and Russia frame BRICS as a sanctuary for the global South, one that offers financial aid, energy deals, and infrastructure investments without political preconditions, taking united stands on issues like the Iranian nuclear deal, Gaza conflict, Afghanistan, and Syria. It's no coincidence that Russian flags were seen in Niamey after a coup in Niger, or that Putin and Xi both speak of BRICS as a post-colonial platform for justice and balance. So here's the real threat. BRICS is giving countries a way to opt out of the Western system, not just in rhetoric, but in currency, trade, and diplomacy. Whether seeking freedom from sanctions, development financing without IMF strings, or just more geopolitical breathing room, especially for oil-producing giants, Saudi Arab and UAE, can the United States shift from guarding an outdated world order to building a more inclusive one before BRICS fills the void? The rise of BRICS isn't just about creating flashy alternatives to Western institutions. It's about exposing the cracks in them. Especially after the tariff war, Trump has begun with the world in a feeble attempt to revive the local economy. BRICS' rapid expansion introduces serious logistical headaches. Its members often have conflicting agendas, and projects like a shared currency or a BRICS version of SWIFT are more theoretical than functional. But symbolic or not, the momentum behind these initiatives reflects a global appetite for multilateralism. Speaking of the IMF, it's time for reform. Developing nations are tired of opaque terms and unrealistic conditions. The US should push for smarter, more targeted lending, packages tied to goals that recipient countries actually proposed, not just externally imposed climate or governance targets. The IMF's 2022 Resilience and Sustainability Trust was a step in the right direction, but its rigid terms made it inaccessible to many of the countries that needed it most. Future assistance must find the middle ground between BRICS's overly flexible funding and the IMF's bureaucratic red tape. The US must rebrand not as a global referee, but as a collaborative partner, which seems to be getting fainter with every new policy Trump administration comes out with. Agencies like the State Department and the International Broadcasting Bureau should amplify stories of equal footing partnerships and shared successes, not paternalistic lectures. As BRICS expands its influence and experiments with alternatives to dollar dominance, the question is no longer if the global order is shifting, but how fast and in whose favor. Will the United States adapt to a more multipolar world, or cling to a model that fewer and fewer countries are buying into? So here's what we would like to ask you. Can the US transition from a position of control to one of credibility? And most importantly, is American influence sustainable if it's built on exclusion rather than evolution? The rise of BRICS isn't just a threat, it's a mirror. The real challenge for Washington is not BRICS itself, but the growing global desire for alternatives. Whether the US chooses to reform or resist will define the next chapter of world order. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into global power shifts.